Myst, the Book of Tiana continues with part 3.4 as read by the bathroom reader. I am covering for the Plurality Report, who has since joined a cockfighting ring in Honduras. That evening, neither Atris nor Anna spoke a word about their visit to Koa. But later, in her room, the impossibility of it struck Anna forcibly. She sat on the edge of the bed, her mouth open in astonished recollection. In that instant after she had linked, she had never felt more scared, no, nor more exhilarated, and the world itself, Koa. Sitting there, she could scarcely believe that she had really been there. It had seemed so strange and dreamlike, yet in a small glass vase on the table at her side was the pale blue flower Atris had given her. Anna leaned close, inhaling its scent. It had been real as this. The very existence of the flower was proof of it. But how could that be? How could simple words link to other places? On their return from Koa, Atris had shown her the book, patiently taking her through page after page, and showing her how such an age was made. She had seen at once the differences between this archaic form and the ordinary written speech of Dani, noting how it was not merely more elaborate, but more specific, a language of precise yet subtle descriptive power. Yet seeing was one thing, believing another. Given all the evidence, her rational mind still fought against accepting it. Beside the book itself, Atris had gone on to show her the books of commentary, 3 in all, the last containing barely a dozen entries. All books, he said, were accompanied by such commentaries which were notes and observations on the ages. Some of the more ancient ages, like Nidur Gemat, had hundreds of books of commentary. She had asked him about it. Nidur Gemat? It is one of 6 worlds belonging to Veovis's family. Ah, I see. And do all the Dani own such ages? No, only the older families own such ages. The rest, the common people of Dani, use the book rooms. You mean there are common worlds that everyone can visit? Yes. In fact, until my father became Grand Master of our guild, we did not have our own age. Koa was written for my father 20 years ago. And before that? We would visit the guild ages, or ages owned by friends. Anna had smiled at that. That is some incentive. Incentive? To work hard and make one's way in the guild. Is there no resentment among the common people? Atris had shrugged. Not that I know of. The common ages are free to everyone. It is not as if they are denied. No, but... She had let the matter drop, returning her attention to the first of the books of commentary. What is this? She had asked after a moment, looking up at him again. There had been a stamped impression on the page beneath a paragraph of small, neat writing in a bright green ink. That is an inscription by the Guild of Maintainers. They ensure that all ages are maintained according to guild laws. And if they are not? Then the book can be confiscated and the owner punished. Does that happen often? Not often. All know the penalty for misdemeanors. To own an age is an immense responsibility. Few are trusted. And yet you took me there. He had hesitated. Then, looking at her directly, he had nodded. Yes, I did, he said. Anna slept well that night, and if she dreamed, she did not recall it when she woke. Refreshed, she sat up, looking across at the delicate blue flower in its vase beside her bed, her mind at once filled with the wonder of what she had witnessed the day before. Atris was not at breakfast, and at first she thought that maybe he had left early to go to the guild hall. But then, at the last moment, as she was finishing her meal, he rushed into the room in a state of immense excitement. Anna! Wonderful news! Veovis is to be given a Korfa Vajah! She stared at him uncomprehendingly. He laughed. I'm sorry. The Korfa Vajah is a special ceremony to mark the guild's acceptance of his book. His first masterwork, that is. It is a momentous event. Few guildsmen are ever given one, and Veovis is immensely young to have been granted such an honor. And Veovis, he wrote this book, like the age we went to? Atris nodded. Only much better, incomparably better. The thought of that made her reassess Lord Veovis. She had thought him merely a rich man's son, a politician. She had not even considered that he was also a creator, let alone a great one. Then it will be a great occasion, no? The greatest for many a year. All of Donny society will be there, and you must come with us, Anna. She looked down. Usually she hated social occasions, but the thought of seeing all of Donny society and of meeting Lord Veovis once again filled her with a strange excitement. When is it to be? She asked, looking back at Atris. A week from now, he answered, on the anniversary of Kareth's homecoming. It was a small ceremony. The 6 assistant Grand Masters and the Grand Master Lord Sajka himself stood in a half-circle on the great platform, while the celebrant Veovis stood before him, his book, the work of 16 long years, on the podium before him. The day was bright and spring-like, the blue sky dotted with clouds. In the distance, snow-capped mountains marched toward the south and the great ocean. Below them the great plains stretched away to east and west and south, while to the north the ancient settlement of Deresa was tucked into a fold of hills. This was the oldest of the guild's many ages, the age of Yakul, made by the first great writer of the guild, Artanen, and here, traditionally, the first official ceremony took place. There would be a second, more public ceremony later on Veovis's own world of Adur Jamat, at which this moment would be reenacted for all to see, but this seemingly low-key event was by far the more important. Each of the 7 senior members of the guild had read the great work that was today accepted into the guild's own canon, and each had given their separate approval for this ultimate recognition of the young guild master's talent. It was 187 years since the last Korfa Vajah, and it would be many years before another. Only 93 books had been accepted into the canon in the whole of the long history of the guild. Among them the 5 great classics of Donny, and only 4 guildsmen had ever received this honor, younger than the man now stood before them. Among those 4 was the legendary Re-Nereth. A faint breeze gusted across the open space, rustling their cloaks as Lord Sajka, Grand Master of the Guild of Writers, stepped forward and, in a tongue as distinct from the common speech of Donny as that of the surface dwellers, pronounced the words of binding. And then it was done. As Veovis bowed his head to his peers, Lord Sajka smiled, and then in the common speech said, "Well done, Veovis. We are immensely proud of you." Veovis looked up and smiled, conscious of the great honor being accorded him. "My lord, guildmasters, I hope to prove worthy of your approval. It is a great privilege to be a member of the Guild of Writers, and I count myself blessed the day I chose to enter it." And so it was done. As, one by one, the elders linked back to Donny, Veovis turned and looked about him at the ancient world of Yakul, and wondered if one day, several thousand years hence, some other guildsman would stand on an age he had written and wonder, as he now wondered, what kind of man it was whose imagination had wrought the connections to such a world as this. He turned and walked over to the linking book. It was time to return to Donny, to pause and reflect before beginning the next chapter in his life. For his next work would be something other. He was determined on it, not just a great work, but a classic. But before all, celebration, for today was his day. Today he became a great man, honored before all Donny. Veovis placed his hand against the glowing panel and linked, a smile appearing on his lips even as his figure shimmered and then faded into the air. On the boat across to Kavir, Anna began to have second thoughts about meeting so many strangers at the ceremony. With Atris it was fine, for it was only the two of them, as it had been with her father, but with all others, even with Atris's parents, she felt ill at ease. She was not by any means a social creature. How she could act and what she should say, these things were a complete mystery to her. "It does not matter," Atris had said to her. "They do not expect you to behave as they behave." Now, as the island grew nearer and she could see the great host of boats queuing to enter the tiny harbor, she felt her nervousness return. Last night, before her conversation with Atris, there had been a strange little scene in Collis's study. Knowing that his father knew nothing of their ventures into Koa, Atris had had his father explain about books to Anna, and she, schooled by Atris in what to say and how to react, had pretended that it was all completely new to her. Collis had clearly been concerned, not only at Anna's possible reaction, but by the problem of just how much to tell her. Atris, however, had convinced him that had Lord Enya not meant her to know, then he would have given explicit instructions to that effect. Collis would, indeed, have gone to see Lord Enya had the great man not taken to his bed again with a recurrence of his illness. And so Collis had prepared her, telling her that she must expect a great surprise, and that she was not to be afraid, for all that she would experience was quite normal. And she, prompted by Atris, had feigned that she understood, even though she would barely have recognized the process of linking from the description Atris's father had given her. It had been vague almost to the point of willfulness. As their boat joined the great queue of boats, Anna could see on the decks endless guildsmen and their wives and sons and daughters, all of them dressed in their best finery. Looking at them, Anna felt her spirits sink again. She should never have come. Then her father's voice sounded clearly in her head.
"Don't worry, Anna. Just be yourself."
It was almost an hour before their boat drew up alongside the stone jetty, and they climbed the dark granite steps, up onto the marble-flagged forecourt. Facing them was the carved stone gate that surrounded the massive doorway. Anna had seen Kavir by day, and it had seemed a strange yet pleasant edifice, but at night it seemed a wholly forbidding place. As they approached the doorway, Atris came alongside her. "Forgive me, Anna," he said quietly, "but we must conform to certain formalities. When we are inside, you will draw back and wait a moment while my father and I are greeted. Then it will be your turn." Inside the great atrium, Anna did as she was told, holding back beside Tessera, as Atris and his father stepped forward and were presented by the chief steward to Rakeri and his son. Anna saw once more that curious taking of both hands that was the Dani way of greeting, the fingers linked, witnessed the smiles, the easy banter between the two sets of men, and knew that this was a world she would never enter, book or no book. As Collis turned, Tessera nudged her gently. "Anna!" Veovis was smiling pleasantly, his attention half on what was being said, half on greeting the next guests. As he looked across and his eyes met hers, the smile faded. There was a moment's consideration, and then he turned to Collis. "Forgive me, Master Collis, but might I have a word with you in private?" Collis looked to his son, then shrugged. "Of course, Veovis." Veovis turned and bowed to Rakeri. "If you would forgive us a moment, Father, I shall not be long." Tessera and Anna had stopped, yards distant of Lord Rakeri. As Veovis and Collis walked away, Atris stared after them, perturbed. Rakeri himself was simply mystified. There was an embarrassed silence. Rakeri looked to Tessera and smiled weakly. Atris simply stared at the door through which Veovis and his father had passed. A moment later the two men returned, his father clearly embarrassed by something. Coming over to Atris, he drew him aside. "It seems there has been a misunderstanding," he began. "I took the invitation to include our house guest, Anna, but it was not meant so." Atris, who had been listening to his father's words, glanced over at Veovis, who stood beside his father, wearing a determined look. A misunderstanding? Atris tried to keep calm, tried not to let his anger show. Yes, Collis said. Anna can stay here in the house. Veovis has promised that his servants will make sure she has everything she wants, but she cannot go through into Adar Jamat. Why not? Collis raised a hand, bidding him to be silent. Because she is not Dani. Atris felt the anger boil up inside him. Keeping his voice low, he leaned close to Collis. This is not right, father. Maybe, Collis conceded, but it is Lord Veovis's decision who enters his age, not ours, and we must respect that. I see. I'm glad you do. Now will you tell her, Atris? Atris stared back at him a moment, then looked down. You must forgive me, father. I respect you deeply and love you, but in this I must disobey you. This is wrong. Atris! But Atris turned and walked across to where Rakeri and Veovis stood. Forgive me, Lord Rakeri, but I have been suffering from an illness these past few weeks. It has left me feeling rather weak, light-headed. He glanced at Veovis, who was watching him hawkishly now. I feel it coming on now, and I beg you to excuse me. Rakeri, who had no idea what was going on, gave a tiny bow of his head.
I commiserate, Atris, but maybe my house surgeon could help.
That is kind of you, my lord, but I really ought to go home. Rakeri shook his head, a look of disappointment in his eyes.
I am sorry about that. I had hoped to talk with you.
Atris bowed low, then turned to Veovis. And may good fortune shine down on you, Veovis. I am sorry that I cannot be there for the celebration of your Korfa-Vajah. There was a black anger now behind Veovis's eyes, yet if he felt like saying something, he kept it well in check. He nodded curtly. Atris stood there a moment longer, wondering whether something more ought to be said. Then, knowing that the situation was irreparable, he turned on his heel and walked across to where Anna stood beside his mother.
Atris,
Tessera said, her curiosity almost overwhelming her by now.
What is going on?
Anna and I are leaving, he said, making no attempt to explain how things were. Ask father. Anna was staring at him now, bemused. Atris, what's happening? Later, he said, then took her arm and turned her, leading her out through the gathered ranks of guildsmen and their families, heading back toward the boat. Atris was standing at the stern of the boat, chewing on a thumbnail and staring back at the great rock of Kavir as it slid into the darkened distance. You do not want to know. Anna, sitting just below him, let out an exasperated sigh. I am not blind, Atris. I saw how Veovis looked at you. There was a misunderstanding. Anna waited, conscious of how pained he was by all of this. After a moment, he spoke again. He said that you were not invited. Ah, I see. He said it was because you were not Dani. That much is undeniable. Atris was silent a moment, then. It was an impossible situation, Anna. He made me choose. And you chose me? Yes. Why? Because he was not right to make me choose. Anna was dressing the next morning when there was a hammering on the door downstairs. It was still very early, and it was unusual for anyone to call at this hour. Going over to her door, she opened it a crack, listening. There was a murmured exchange between Collis and his steward. Then, Here? Are you sure? There was a silence for a moment, then, Lord Veovis, welcome. To what do we owe this most pleasant surprise? I have come to see your son, Master Collis. Is he at home? He is. I shall go and see if he has risen. If you would take a seat. Meanwhile, I'll not be long. A hand briefly brushed her arm. She turned, her heart thumping, and found herself staring into Atris's face. Atris! Will you come down with me, Anna? She hesitated, then shook her head. This is between you two. No, this is about you, Anna. You ought to be there." Veovis stood as they stepped into the room. "Atris," he said, coming across the room, both hands extended. "Will you forgive me?" Atris took his hands, tentatively at first, then with a greater firmness. "That depends." "I understand. I handled things badly. I know that, and I am sorry for it." He looked past Atris to where Anna stood. "And you, Anna, I owe you an apology too." "You do indeed," Atris said sternly. Veovis nodded, accepting the rebuke. "Yes, and that is why I have brought you a present, to try to make amends." He turned and, going back across, picked up a box and brought it back, handing it to Anna. It was a small square box with tiny air holes in one side of it. She stared at it a moment, then untied the bright red ribbon and lifted the lid, and then looked up at Veovis, laughing. "Why, it's beautiful! What is it?" Carefully cupping it in one hand, she lifted out a tiny creature, a veritable fur ball, its long silky coat the dark brown-black of rich loam. Its large cobalt-colored eyes stared up at her. "It is a Riku," Veovis said. "It comes from Adur Jamat." Atris, who had turned to look, now smiled. "Thank you. It was a kind thought." Veovis sighed, then somberly, "I am sorry you were not there last night, Atris." "And I, yet we must resolve this matter, no?" Anna, who was stroking the rippled, leathery neck of the tiny creature, looked up, glancing from one to the other, so it was not settled, even now. Veovis took a long breath, then nodded. "Tonight," he said. "Come to my rooms. We'll talk about it then." It was very late when he came back that night. Anna waited up, listening as his footsteps came up the stairs. As he made to pass her room, she opened the door and stepped out. "Atris?" she whispered. Atris turned. He looked weary. "Is everything all right now?" He stared at her, then, "You had better come to my study, Anna. We need to talk." The words seemed ominous. Anna nodded, then followed him down the long corridor and into his room. "Well?" she asked, as she took a chair facing him. Atris shrugged. "I am afraid Veovis is intractable." "Intractable? In what way? You are friends again, are you not?" "Perhaps, but he will not bend on one important matter." "And that is?" Atris looked down glumly. "He says that as you are not Dani, he will not countenance you going into an age, no, nor of learning anything about Dani books. He claims it is not right." "Then you said nothing of our visit to Koa?" Atris hesitated, then shook his head. "Can I ask why? It is unlike you to be so indirect." "Maybe, but I had no will to fight Veovis a second time." "So did you promise him anything?" "No. I said only that I would consider what he said." "And was that enough for him?" "For now." She stared at him a moment, then, "So what have you decided?" His eyes have met hers again. "Can I hide nothing from you, Anna?" "No, but then you have had little practice in hiding what you feel from people, Atris." Atris stared at her for a long time, then sighed. "So, you think I should abandon my plan?" "Your plan?" In answer, he opened the top right-hand drawer of his desk and took out a big, leather-bound book. It was a book, a Dani book. She could see that at a glance. But when he opened it, there was no box on the right-hand page, and the inside pages were blank. She stared at it. "What is it?" "It is a Cortania," he said. "A blank book, waiting to be written." Anna looked up, her mouth falling open slightly. "I have had it for a year now," he answered. "I have been making notes toward an age, one I myself am writing, and I thought that perhaps you might like to help me." But now she saw what he meant. There was a choice: defy Veovis and lie about what they were doing, or go along with the Veovis's wishes and deny themselves this. "And what do you want, Atris?" she asked quietly, her dark eyes probing his. "What do you really want?" "I want to teach you everything," he said. "Everything I know." In the months that followed, the relationship between Atris and Veovis was strained. As if both sensed that all was not well between them, they kept much to themselves. It was a situation that could not last long, however, and a chance remark to Veovis by a young man from the Guild of Maintainers brought things to a head once more. Atris was in his rooms at the Guild Hall when Veovis burst in upon him unannounced. "Is it true?" Veovis demanded, leaning across the desk. Atris stared at his old friend in amazement. Veovis's face was suffused with anger. The muscles stood out at his neck. "Is what true?" "The girl, the outsider. Are you teaching her to write? How could you, Atris, after all you promised?" "I promised nothing. I said only that I would consider your words." "That's pure sophistry, and you know it. You lied to me, Atris. You lied and deceived me. And not only me, but Donnie itself." "Now come," Atris said, standing. "You are a traitor, Atris, and you can be sure I shall be taking this matter before the council." And with that, Veovis turned and stormed from the room. Atris stood there a moment, half in shock, staring at the open doorway. Since the maintainer's inspection 2 weeks back, he had feared this moment. Veovis wouldn't go to the council, surely? But he knew Veovis. His friend was not one to make idle threats. Anna sat in the window of her room, the tiny Riku asleep in her lap, as she gazed out over the ancient city and the harbor far below. They had come that morning, 6 uniformed guards from the Guild of Maintainers, and the great Lord Rahira himself. Kalis and Atris had greeted them at the door, then stood back as Guildmaster Sijarun walked through and opened the door to the book room, removing the Book of Koa and the new uncompleted book that had no name. The decision of the council had been unanimous. Kalis and his son were given no voice in the matter. It had been ruled that there had been a serious breach of protocol. In future, no one who was not of Donnie blood would be allowed to see a book or visit an age. It was, Veovis had argued, important that they set a precedent, and so they had. Anna sighed. It was all her fault, and now Atris was in despair. Even now he sat in his study, wrestling with the question of whether to resign his seat on the council. She had seen Kalis's face, and Tessera's. To lose a book, Atris had once told her, was a matter of the gravest importance, but to have one taken forcibly, by order of the council, was far, far worse. And she had brought that upon them. She groaned softly. There was no way she might make amends. No way, unless... The old man looked across at Anna, staring at her through half-lidded eyes. Then, pulling his cloak about him, he answered her.
"I do not know," he said, shaking his head sadly. "I really do not know, even if we find something."
"They will listen. They have to listen." Kedri, the master of the Guild of Legislators, lifted his shoulders in a shrug. Then, with a sad smile,
"All right, I shall try my best, young Anna, for you and for my dear friend Atris."
He sat there for a long time after she had gone, staring straight ahead, as if in a trance. It was thus that his assistant, Haran, found him. "Master, are you all right?" Kedri slowly lifted his head, his eyes focusing on the young man.
"What? Oh, forgive me, Haran. I was far away, remembering."
Haran smiled and bowed his head. "I just came to say that the new intake of cadets is here. 12 keen young students, fresh from the academy. What shall I do with them?" Normally, Kedri would have found some anodyne assignment, an exercise in dust-dry law, overseen by some board assistant or other, but the arrival of this new intake coincided perfectly with his need. If he was to search back through the records, he would need help, and what better help than a dozen young, keen men anxious to impress him. At the same time, he needed to be discreet. If word of his activities got back to the council, who knew what fuss might ensue, particularly if young Lord Veovis got wind of it. By assigning these cadets to the Guild Age of Gadar to search among the legal records stored in the great library there, he could split two rocks with a single blow, as the old saying went.
"Take them to the book room," he said. "I'll address them there. I have a task for them."
Haran stared back at him a moment, surprised, then, recollecting himself, he bowed low and quickly hurried away. It was strange that the girl, Anna, had come to him this morning, for only the evening before he had dreamt of the time he had spent with the surveyors 30 years ago. It was then that he had first come to know young Atris. Atris had been assigned to him to show him how things worked and answer his every query. They had got on well from the start and had been friends ever since. As far as Anna was concerned, he had met her only once before, when Atris brought her to his house, but he had liked her instantly and saw at once why Atris was fascinated by her. She had a sharp intelligence and an inquisitive mind that were the match of any guildsman. It had crossed his mind at once that, had she been Dani, she would have made young Atris the perfect bride. Even so, it surprised him still that she had come and not Atris, for he had half expected Atris to pay him a call. Kedri sat back, stretching his neck muscles and then turning his head from side to side, trying to relieve the tension he was feeling. What he had agreed to do would not make him a popular man in certain circles, yet it had been a simple choice, to help his young friend Atris or abandon him. Kedri sighed heavily. The great library of legislation on Gadar contained a mass of information stretching back over 6,000 years. The handwritten minutes of countless council meetings and hearings, of guild committees and tribunals, not to speak of the endless shelves of private communications between guild masters. It would be like digging for one specific tiny crystal in the middle of a mountain. And he had 2 weeks and a dozen keen young men to do it. Lord Enia sat at his desk. Atris's cloak of office lay folded on the desk before him. It had come that morning, along with that of Atris's father, Kalis. Enia had dealt with Kalis, sending the cloak back to the Grand Master of the Surveyors. Whatever the rights or wrongs of the issue, Kalis was clearly not to blame, but Atris's conduct was a different matter entirely. It was fairly simple, really. Either he accepted Atris's resignation now and ended the rumors and speculation, or he left matters to the Guild of Surveyors, who, so he understood, had already instigated investigations into the conduct of their representative. Whatever happened now, the damage was already done. The vote in council had betrayed the mood of the guilds. In teaching the outsider Dani, and in showing her an age, Atris had not merely exceeded his brief, but had shown poor judgment. Some even claimed that he had been bewitched by the young girl and had lost his senses, but Enia doubted that. Those who said that did not know Atris. Yet Atris had been injudicious. Enia straightened slightly. He had not slept at all last night, and every joint ached as if it had been dipped in hot oil, but that was not unusual. These days he lived in constant pain. With a small, regretful sigh, he drew a sheet of paper to him and, taking a quill pen from the inkstand, quickly wrote an acceptance letter, then signed his name. Once the remaining lords had set their names to it, the letter would be sealed and incorporated into the public record. In the meantime, a notice would be posted throughout Dani, advising the citizens of this news. And so ended a promising career. Enia reached across and rang his summons bell. At once a secretary appeared at the door.
"Take this to Lord Rahira at once."
Anna stood before the three of them. "So you wish to leave?" Kalis asked. "No," she answered. "You have all been kind to me, yet I feel I ought to. I have brought so much trouble to this household." The choice was mine, Atris said. If anyone should leave, it should be me.
That would be wrong, Anna said. Besides, I shall be comfortable enough at Lord Ennia's mansion.
Nonsense,
Tessera said, speaking for the first time since Anna had summoned them to this meeting.
I will not hear of it. Lord Enia is an old man. No, you will stay here.
Anna stared at Tessera, astonished. She had thought Tessera, most of all, would have wanted her gone. Since the council's meeting, she had practically been ostracized. Yet, Tessera seemed by far the most indignant of the three.
Then it is settled, Collis said, smiling proudly at his wife. Anna stays here as family.